The distant call of a crow echoed across the barren landscape, as Lucy Dawson pulled the rough burlap sack lower over her face, ensuring not a single inch of her features could be seen by passing strangers. Autumn of 1878 had brought cooler winds to the Wyoming territory, but it wasn't the chill that caused her to shiver as she walked the dusty road toward the small town of Redemption Creek. It was the weight of shame and the bitter memories that followed her like persistent shadows. The town appeared on the horizon, a collection of weathered buildings clinging to existence against the vast prairie backdrop. Lucy clutched the small bag containing her few possessions tighter against her chest. She'd been traveling for weeks, fleeing a past that had marked her in ways more visible than she could bear. "Keep walking," she whispered to herself, the words muffled by the coarse fabric. One foot in front of the other. The stagecoach had dropped her a mile back, the driver eyeing her covered face with suspicion before hurriedly continuing on his route. Lucy couldn't blame him. A woman traveling alone was unusual enough, but one who concealed her face behind a sack inspired a particular kind of wariness. Redemption Creek had not been her intended destination. Lucy had planned to travel farther west, perhaps to Oregon or California, somewhere she could disappear entirely. But funds had run short, and the need for shelter and work had grown urgent. As she approached the town's main street, the inevitable stares began. Children stopped their play to gawk, women whispered behind gloved hands, and men's conversations halted mid-sentence. Lucy kept her eyes downcast, viewing the world through the small eye holes she'd cut in the sack. "Mama, why's that lady wearing a bag?" a small child's voice carried on the wind. "Hush now," came the mother's swift reply. "Don't stare at unfortunates." Lucy's shoulders hunched further. Unfortunate. That was one word for it. The general store stood at the far end of the street, its faded sign promising goods, provisions, and sundries. With trembling hands, Lucy pushed open the door, the little bell above announcing her arrival. The elderly shopkeeper looked up, his spectacles sliding down his nose as his eyes widened at the sight of her. "Good afternoon," Lucy said softly. "I was wondering if you might know of any work available in town. I can clean, cook, sew." The shopkeeper cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Can't say as I do, miss. Times are hard. Most folks are just scraping by." Lucy nodded, though he couldn't see the gesture beneath the sack. "I understand. Thank you anyway." As she turned to leave, the door swung open and a tall figure filled the frame. The sunlight silhouetted him, but Lucy could make out broad shoulders, the unmistakable shape of a cowboy hat, and the jingle of spurs as he stepped inside. "Afternoon, Mr. Peterson," the man said to the shopkeeper, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate in the small space. "Got those supplies ready for the Triple R?" "Indeed I do, Mr. Reed. Just finished putting them together this morning." Xavier Reed nodded, then noticed Lucy standing motionless by the counter. Even through the small holes in her sack, she could feel his gaze upon her, curious but not unkind. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat politely. Lucy managed a small curtsy. "Sir." The shopkeeper bustled about, gathering a large order of supplies while Lucy edged toward the door. Just as her hand reached for the knob, the shopkeeper's voice stopped her. "Actually, miss, I just remembered. Xavier here might be able to help you. The Triple R Ranch lost their cook last month. They've been making do, but I hear the hands are getting mighty tired of burned beans." Xavier turned to face Lucy fully, and she could now see more of him through her limited vision. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of the summer sky. A thin scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into the collar of his shirt. "You looking for work, madam?" he asked. Lucy nodded. "Yes, sir, I can cook well. Very well, in fact. Xavier studied her for a long moment. Ranch is 10 miles outside town. Works hard, days are long, pays fair though. I'm not afraid of hard work, Lucy replied, her voice steadier now. And the? He gestured vaguely toward her covered face, the sack. Lucy's hand instinctively rose to touch the rough burlap. It stays on. I have my reasons. A heavy silence filled the store. Lucy held her breath, waiting for the rejection she was certain would come. Instead, Xavier shrugged. Reckon a person's face don't matter much when it comes to cooking. Can you start today? Relief flooded through Lucy so intensely that her knees nearly buckled. Yes, I can. Good. Help me load these supplies and we'll head out. The journey to the Triple R Ranch passed mostly in silence. Xavier drove the wagon with skilled hands, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing brief anecdotes about the territory. Lucy sat beside him, grateful for his lack of intrusive questions. Ranch belongs to my uncle, Xavier explained as they crested a hill that revealed a sprawling property below. Richard Reed. He's getting on in years, so I help run things. 25 hands work here, plus a few seasonal workers. They'll be your main audience, so to speak. Lucy nodded. Are they? Will they accept someone like me? Xavier glanced at her. They might be curious at first, but they're good men. Work hard, mind their own business mostly. Uncle Richard might ask some questions, though. He's the cautious type. The ranch house came into view. A substantial 2-story structure with a wide porch and several outbuildings scattered nearby. Cattle dotted the distant pastures, and the sounds of working men echoed from the barn. As Xavier brought the wagon to a stop, a stern-looking older man emerged from the house. His silver hair and beard were neatly trimmed, and despite his age he stood straight as a ramrod. "You're back early," he called out, then stopped short when he spotted Lucy. "And you've brought company." Xavier jumped down from the wagon and offered Lucy a hand. "Uncle Richard, this is Miss Dawson," Lucy supplied. "Lucy Dawson. Miss Dawson is our new cook," Xavier continued. "Mr. Peterson in town mentioned she was looking for work, and the timing seemed providential." Richard Reed's bushy eyebrows drew together as he regarded Lucy's covered face. "I see, and the unusual attire. It's a condition of her employment," Xavier said before Lucy could respond. "She cooks with her hands, not her face." Richard didn't appear entirely convinced, but he nodded slowly. "Very well. We'll give it a try. Xavier, show her to the cookhouse and help her get settled. Supper's at 6, as always." Lucy followed Xavier across the yard to a small building adjacent to the main house. Inside was a spacious kitchen with a large wood-burning stove, ample counter space, and shelves stocked with provisions. "It's not fancy," Xavier said, "but it's functional. Pantries through there, cold storage in the root cellar. The hands eat in the mess hall next door. Cook's quarters are in the back, just a small room, but it's private." Lucy ran her hand along the worn but clean counter. "It's perfect, thank you." Xavier lingered by the door, his hat in his hands. "Miss Dawson, I don't mean to pry, but are you in some kind of trouble?" "Because if you are—" "No," Lucy interrupted quickly. "Nothing like that. I'm not running from the law, if that's what you're asking." "That's good to hear," he said with a small smile. "Well, I'll leave you to get acquainted with your kitchen. Supplies are in the wagon. I'll have one of the boys bring them in." After Xavier left, Lucy stood alone in the silence of the kitchen, feeling a strange mixture of relief and trepidation. She'd secured employment and shelter, which was more than she dared hope for this morning. Yet the curious eyes and inevitable questions would follow her here too. Slowly, she reached up and lifted the sack just enough to take a deep breath of fresh air. The small mirror hanging by the wash basin caught her reflection, just her eyes visible above the burlap's edge. eyes that had once been described as her best feature, now shadowed with sadness. Lucy quickly pulled the sack back down and turned away from the mirror. The past was behind her, and this was a new beginning, even if it came with a face hidden in shame. The first week at Triple R Ranch passed in a blur of activity. Lucy rose before dawn each day to prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, who filed into the mess hall with sleepy eyes that widened at the sight of her sack-covered head. Yet the quality of her cooking quickly overshadowed their curiosity about her appearance. "Miss Dawson," one of the older hands said after his third helping of biscuits and gravy, "I don't care if you're wearing a sack or a crown, these are the best biscuits in the Wyoming territory." Lucy nodded her thanks, growing more comfortable with the routine and the men's straightforward manner. They seemed to accept her peculiarity with surprising ease, though she sometimes caught them exchanging glances when they thought she wasn't looking. Xavier Reed proved to be a fair and thoughtful employer. He checked on her daily, ensuring she had everything needed for meal preparation. Their conversations were brief but increasingly comfortable. Lucy found herself looking forward to his visits, appreciating his lack of judgment and his quiet strength. On her 8th day at the ranch, a thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains, bringing with it torrential rain that turned the yard to mud and sent the cattle huddling under sheltering trees. Lucy was in the kitchen preparing stew for dinner when the door burst open, bringing with it a gust of wind and rain. Xavier stood in the doorway, soaked to the skin, water dripping from his hat and coat. "Sorry to intrude, Miss Dawson. Just checking that your roof's holding. Some of the outbuildings are leaking something fierce." "It's fine," Lucy said, gesturing to the dry floor. "Not a drop coming through." Xavier nodded but made no move to leave. Instead, he stood awkwardly, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Is there something else?" Lucy asked. "I thought you might like some company," he said, then quickly added, "with the storm and all. Sometimes the thunder can be unsettling when you're alone." Lucy smiled beneath her sack. "I wouldn't mind the company. Would you like some coffee? It's fresh." Xavier removed his dripping hat and coat, hanging them by the door. "That would be mighty welcome." As Lucy poured the coffee, a particularly loud crack of thunder shook the small building. She jumped, nearly spilling the hot liquid. "Easy there," Xavier said, stepping forward to steady her hand. His fingers brushed against hers briefly, sending an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with the coffee. They sat at the small table in the corner of the kitchen, the rain drumming a steady rhythm on the roof above. For a while, they simply sipped their coffee in companionable silence. "My mother used to say that thunderstorms were just the angels moving furniture in heaven," Xavier said suddenly. "Silly notion, I suppose. I like that," Lucy replied. "Better than being afraid of them." Xavier studied her over the rim of his cup. "What are you afraid of, Miss Dawson? Besides thunder, I mean." The question caught Lucy off guard. She looked down at her hands, thinking carefully before answering. "Being judged for things beyond my control, being seen as less than human because of circumstances." Xavier nodded slowly. "Seems we all carry burdens of some kind, some are just more visible than others." "And what's your burden, Mr. Reed?" Lucy asked softly. A shadow crossed his face. "Promises I couldn't keep, a brother I couldn't save." He cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with having revealed so much. But that's a story for another day. The storm continued well into the evening, forcing the ranch hands to eat their stew quickly before dashing back to their bunkhouse. Richard Reed sent word that he would take his meal in the main house, leaving Lucy and Xavier alone in the kitchen once more. As Lucy washed the last of the dishes, Xavier leaned against the counter, drying them with a towel. The domesticity of the scene struck Lucy as both strange and comforting. "You know," Xavier said carefully. "The men have all but forgotten about your covering. Your cooking has won them over completely." Lucy's hands stilled in the soapy water. "I'm glad to hear that, but I doubt they've forgotten entirely." "Perhaps not," Xavier admitted. "Human nature being what it is. But they respect your privacy, as do I." He paused, setting down the plate he'd been drying. "Though I must admit to a certain curiosity myself." Lucy tensed. "Mr. Reed, Xavier," he corrected gently. "Please." "Xavier," she amended. "Whatever you're imagining beneath this sack, I can assure you the reality is worse." His blue eyes held hers through the eye holes of her covering. "I doubt that very much, Lucy." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about the way it sounded in his deep voice made her heart flutter strangely. "You're kind," she said, turning back to the dishes. "But trust me when I say this is better for everyone." Xavier didn't press the issue further, but as he bid her good night, his gaze lingered on her in a way that suggested their conversation was far from over. As autumn deepened toward winter, life at the Triple R fell into a comfortable pattern. Lucy's cooking became legendary among the ranch hands, and even Richard Reed began to compliment her skills. The sack covering her face remained a constant, but it seemed to fade into the background of ranch life, becoming just another peculiarity in a land full of unusual characters. Xavier, however, grew increasingly attentive. He found reasons to visit the kitchen throughout the day, bringing her wildflowers he'd discovered on his rides or interesting stories from his travels. Lucy found herself looking forward to these moments, even as she reminded herself that such attachments were dangerous for someone in her position. One crisp November afternoon, Xavier appeared in the kitchen doorway with a small wooden crate. "Special delivery," he announced, setting it on the counter. "All the way from San Francisco." Lucy wiped her hands on her apron. "What is it?" "Open it and see." Inside the crate, nestled in straw, were jars of exotic spices, cinnamon, nutmeg, cardamom, and others Lucy had only read about in cookbooks. "Xavier," she breathed, lifting a jar of saffron as if it were made of gold. "These must have cost a fortune." He shrugged, a slight flush coloring his tanned cheeks. "Uncle Richard's been in such good spirits since your cooking improved his digestion. Figured it was a sound investment." Lucy knew it was more than that. The thoughtfulness of the gift, remembering how she'd mentioned missing certain spices weeks ago, spoke of a deeper consideration than mere ranch business. "Thank you," she said softly. "This means more than you know." Xavier stepped closer, his expression growing serious. "Lucy, I've been meaning to ask you something." Her heart quickened. "Yes. The harvest dance is happening in town next weekend. I was wondering if you might consider attending with me." Lucy froze. A dance in town, with people staring, whispering behind her back. The thought was terrifying. "I can't," she said quickly. People would see a woman enjoying an evening of music and company," Xavier finished for her. "Nothing more." "You know it wouldn't be that simple," Lucy argued. "Not with this." She gestured to her covered face. Xavier's expression softened. "What if I told you I don't care? That I've come to know the person beneath that sack, and that's who I'm asking to dance?" Tears welled in Lucy's eyes, thankfully hidden from view. "You say that now, but if you knew—" "Then let me know," he said quietly. "Trust me enough to show me, Lucy." The request hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Lucy's hand unconsciously rose to touch the rough burlap that had become both her prison and her protection. "I can't," she whispered. "Please don't ask that of me." Disappointment flickered across Xavier's face, but he nodded. "I understand. The invitation to the dance remains open, regardless." He tipped his hat and left her alone with her thoughts and the fragrant spices that suddenly seemed to mock her inability to grasp the sweetness being offered. That night, Lucy lay awake in her small bed, replaying Xavier's words in her mind. Trust me enough to show me. Could she? After 3 years of hiding of shame, could she trust anyone to look upon her face without recoiling in horror or pity? Xavier had been nothing but kind, but kindness had its limits. She had learned that lesson all too well in Philadelphia, when the man she'd thought loved her had been unable to bear the sight of her after the accident. The memory of Andrew's face first shocked, then disgusted, finally pitying still haunted her dreams. The fire that had claimed her family home had spared her life but marked her forever. The right side of her face bore the twisted, rippled scars of severe burns, pulling her eye and mouth into a permanent grimace. Her once admired beauty had melted away in the flames, leaving behind a visage that caused children to cry and adults to avert their eyes. After months of whispers and stares in Philadelphia, Lucy had taken her modest inheritance and fled west, seeking anonymity in a land where people minded their own business. The sack had been a desperate measure during her journey, but it had provided an unexpected freedom from the constant reactions to her appearance. Now, for the first time since the fire, she had found a place where she felt valued, where her skills rather than her face defined her. And Xavier kind, patient Xavier was threatening to upend that fragile peace with his gentle persistence. "I can't lose this," she whispered to the darkness. "I can't bear to see the look in his eyes change." The harvest dance loomed closer, and Lucy could feel Xavier's hope, despite his respectful distance. He didn't mention it again directly, but she noticed him supervising repairs to the ranch wagon, polishing the brass fittings until they gleamed in the autumn sunlight. 3 days before the dance, disaster struck. Lucy was preparing a complicated dessert for Richard Reed's birthday dinner when the kitchen door swung open suddenly, startling her. She jerked back from the stove, but not before her sleeve caught the open flame. In an instant, the fabric ignited. Lucy screamed, memories of the Philadelphia fire flooding back as she frantically tried to extinguish the flames. The kitchen door banged open again, and Xavier rushed in, taking in the situation at a glance. He grabbed a nearby blanket, throwing it around Lucy's arm and smothering the fire with quick, decisive movements. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his face pale with concern. Lucy was trembling violently, both from fear and from the flood of traumatic memories. "My arm," she managed. "I think it's burned." Xavier gently unwrapped the blanket to assess the damage. The sleeve of her dress was charred, revealing angry red skin beneath. "We need to treat this," he said firmly. "Come with me to the main house. Uncle Richard keeps medical supplies there." Lucy balked. "No, I can manage it myself. Just bring the supplies here." Xavier's expression hardened. "This isn't the time for pride, Lucy. Burns can turn bad quickly if not properly cleaned and dressed. I've seen it happen to ranch hands." Before she could protest further, he swept her into his arms and carried her out of the kitchen. Lucy was too shocked to resist, though she pulled the sack more securely around her face with her uninjured hand. Richard Reed was in the study when they entered the main house. He rose quickly, alarm evident on his weathered face. "What's happened?" "Kitchen accident," Xavier explained tersely. "Burns on her arm. Where's that salve Dr. Morrison left last time he was through?" Richard hurried to retrieve the medical supplies while Xavier gently set Lucy down on a chair in the parlor. He knelt before her, his face etched with concern. "Let me see your arm," he said softly. Lucy hesitantly extended her injured limb. The burn wasn't severe, but it was painful, a stark reminder of the far worse injuries she concealed. Xavier worked with surprising gentleness, cleaning the burn and applying a soothing salve before wrapping it in clean bandages. His touch was tender, his focus absolute. Lucy found herself watching his face, the slight furrow between his brows as he concentrated, the firm set of his jaw, the unexpected softness in his eyes. "There," he said finally. "It's not too deep. Should heal clean if we keep it dressed." "Thank you," Lucy whispered. Xavier met her gaze through the eye holes of her sack. "You're shaking like a leaf. Was it just the burn or something more?" Lucy looked away. "Fire and I, we have a complicated history." Xavier's hand moved as if to touch her covered cheek, then stopped, hovering in the air between them. "Lucy, whatever you're hiding, whatever you're afraid of, it doesn't change how I feel about you," her breath caught. "And how is that? I think you know," he said quietly. "I think you've known for some time now." The moment stretched between them, fraught with unspoken emotions. Then Richard Reed cleared his throat from the doorway, breaking the spell. "I've canceled the birthday dinner," he announced. "Seems inappropriate under the circumstances. Xavier, perhaps you should escort Miss Dawson back to her quarters to rest." The walk back to the cookhouse was silent, each lost in their own thoughts. At her door, Xavier paused. "The offer still stands," he said. "For the harvest dance." Lucy looked up at him, wishing she could make him understand without words. "Xavier, just think about it," he interrupted gently. "That's all I ask." The night of the harvest dance arrived clear and cold, with a full moon illuminating the landscape in silver light. Lucy stood at her small window, watching as ranch hands in their Sunday best climbed into wagons, laughing and teasing one another about their dancing prospects. Xavier had not come to the kitchen all day. Lucy told herself it was for the best, even as disappointment sat heavy in her chest. She had made the right decision. Dancing in public, becoming a spectacle, it would only end in humiliation. She turned away from the window and caught sight of her reflection in the small mirror. The burlap sack stared back at her, eye holes like empty sockets in the rough fabric. For 3 years, this had been her face to the world. A non-face, a hiding place. With trembling fingers, Lucy reached up and touched the edge of the sack. What would it be like to feel the cool night air on her skin again? To look up at the stars without peering through crude holes in burlap? To dance in a man's arms without a barrier between them? A soft knock at the door startled her from her reverie. "Lucy." Xavier's voice came through the wood. "Are you there?" She hesitated, then crossed to the door and opened it slightly. Xavier stood on her threshold, dressed in a clean shirt and vest, his hair neatly combed. He held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously. "I know you said you wouldn't come," he began, "and I respect your decision, but I couldn't leave without asking one more time." His blue eyes were earnest in the lamplight. "Dance with me, Lucy, just one dance." Lucy's heart hammered against her ribs. "I can't go into town like this." "Then dance with me here," Xavier suggested. "Under the stars, with no one to see but the moon and whatever creatures might be watching from the hills." The simplicity of the offer took her breath away. No crowd, no whispers, just the two of them and the vast Wyoming night. "One dance," she agreed softly. Xavier's face lit up with a smile that made her knees weak. He offered his arm, and she took it, allowing him to lead her away from the cookhouse to a flat stretch of ground near the barn. The sounds of a distant fiddle floated on the air, someone at the ranch practicing for the town dance. "May I have this dance, Miss Dawson?" Xavier asked formally, executing a perfect bow. Despite her nervousness, Lucy laughed. "You may, Mr. Reed." His hand settled at her waist, warm and steady, while his other hand clasped hers. They began to move in time to the faint music, turning slowly under the vast canopy of stars. Lucy couldn't remember the last time she had been held this way, with respect, with care, with something that felt dangerously like adoration. "See." "Not so terrible," Xavier murmured. his breath warm even through the burlap covering her face. "No," Lucy agreed. "Not terrible at all." They danced in silence for several minutes, their movements growing more fluid as Lucy relaxed into his embrace. The night was perfect, cool but not cold, bright with moonlight, scented with pine and sage. As the fiddle music faded, Xavier slowed their steps but didn't release her. "Lucy," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "I've been patient. I've respected your privacy. But I need to tell you something, and I need you to see my face when I say it." Lucy tensed but remained in his arms. "What is it?" "I'm falling in love with you," he said simply. "Not with your cooking, though it's magnificent, not with some imagined version of you. With you, the woman who's shown more courage and dignity than anyone I've ever known." Tears sprang to Lucy's eyes, blurring her vision through the small holes in her covering. "Xavier, you don't know what you're saying. You haven't seen me." "I see you every day," he countered. "Your kindness to the old ranch hands, your patience with young Billy when he drops dishes, the way you hum when you think no one's listening, the strength it takes to carry on despite whatever burden you bear." His voice dropped lower. "I see you, Lucy Dawson. And I'm asking you to trust me enough to let me see all of you." Lucy's heart pounded so hard she was certain he must hear it. 3 years of hiding, 3 years of shame. Could she find the courage to end it now, knowing it might also end whatever was growing between them? "I was in a fire," she whispered, the words tumbling out before she could reconsider. 3 years ago in Philadelphia, my family home, my parents didn't survive." She swallowed hard. "I did, but the right side of my face, it's badly scarred, deformed." Xavier's hold on her didn't falter. "I'm sorry about your family, truly. But scars are just evidence of battles survived, Lucy. These aren't just scars," she insisted. "The man I was to marry, he couldn't bear to look at me afterward. He released me from our engagement because he said it would be cruel to expect him to wake up to such a face every morning." Anger flashed in Xavier's eyes. "Then he was a fool who never deserved you." "You say that now," Lucy said bitterly. "But you haven't seen." "Then show me," Xavier challenged gently. "Here now, with only the moon as witness. Show me, and if I recoil, if I show any sign of disgust, you can go back to hiding and I'll never trouble you again." Lucy trembled, poised on the edge of a precipice. To show him was to risk everything, the peace she'd found at Triple R, the connection they'd built, the fragile hope that had begun to bloom in her heart. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "I know," Xavier said, "but I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." With a shuddering breath, Lucy reached up and grasped the edge of the burlap sack. Time seemed to slow as she gradually lifted it, revealing first her chin, then her mouth with its slight downward pull on the right side, then her nose, and finally her eyes. The sack came off completely, and Lucy stood exposed beneath the moonlight, her scarred face bare to Xavier's gaze for the first time. Xavier stared, his expression unreadable in the silver light. Lucy held her breath, waiting for the familiar signs of revulsion, the widened eyes, the involuntary step backward, the quick recovery masked as pity. Instead, Xavier lifted his hand and with infinite gentleness traced the path of her scars with his fingertips. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Lucy blinked in disbelief. "Don't lie to me, not about this." "I'm not lying," Xavier insisted. "Yes, you bear the marks of something terrible. But your eyes, God, Lucy, your eyes are the same ones that have been watching me through those holes for months. The same soul shines through them." Tears spilled down Lucy's cheeks, following the ridges and valleys of her scarred skin. "You're not repulsed." Xavier shook his head, a tender smile curving his lips. "I told you I've been falling in love with you. This," he gestured to her revealed face, "this doesn't change that. If anything, knowing what you've endured only makes me admire you more." With careful deliberation, Xavier leaned forward and pressed his lips to her scarred cheek. The gentle kiss sent shivers through Lucy's entire body. When he pulled back, his eyes were shining with unshed tears of his own. "I can't promise you a perfect life, Lucy Dawson," he said. "The Triple R is demanding. Wyoming winters are harsh, and I'm far from a perfect man. But I can promise you this: you will never need to hide from me. Not your face, not your fears, not your dreams." Lucy reached up to touch his face, marveling at the freedom of the gesture without the burlap between them. "I never thought I'd find someone who could look at me this way again." "Then you underestimated the power of true feeling," Xavier said simply. "Now, may I have another dance? This time, I'd like to actually see my partner's expressions." Lucy laughed through her tears, nodding as Xavier drew her back into his arms. They danced beneath the stars, no music but the night sounds of the ranch and the beating of their hearts. Lucy's face remained uncovered, the cool air a blessing on skin that had been hidden for too long. As they swayed together, Lucy realized the weight she'd been carrying had lightened. The shame hadn't disappeared entirely. Such deep wounds didn't heal overnight, but sharing it with Xavier had transformed it somehow, made it bearable in a way it hadn't been before. "What happens tomorrow?" she asked. "When the ranch hands see me without the sack?" Xavier's arms tightened around her. "They might be startled at first, but they're good men. They'll follow my lead. And in time, they'll see what I see: a strong, beautiful woman who makes the best biscuits in the territory." Lucy smiled, no longer concerned about how the expression pulled at her scars. "And your uncle?" "Uncle Richard suspected something of the sort," Xavier admitted. "He lost his wife to a fever that left her face badly marked before it took her life. He of all people understands that appearances matter far less than character." They continued dancing as the moon climbed higher in the night sky, neither willing to end this moment of newfound intimacy. When the chill finally drove them toward shelter, Xavier walked Lucy back to her quarters, her hand firmly clasped in his. At her door, he paused. "Will you come to church with me on Sunday, without the sack?" The question was gentle but represented a monumental step: appearing in public, facing the inevitable stares and whispers. A month ago, even a week ago, Lucy would have refused outright. But now, with Xavier looking at her with such tenderness, the prospect seemed less terrifying. "Yes," she said. "I think I'm ready to stop hiding." Xavier's smile was radiant in the moonlight. "I'll be right beside you every step of the way." He leaned forward and with exquisite care pressed a soft kiss to her lips. "Good night, Lucy. Sweet dreams." As Xavier walked away toward the main house, Lucy touched her fingers to her lips, marveling at the sensation of being kissed again after so long. The burlap sack lay forgotten on the ground where she had dropped it during their dance. After a moment's hesitation, she picked it up and carried it inside, not to wear again, but to keep a reminder of how far she had come, and of the man whose steady heart had given her the courage to remove it at last. Spring came early to Wyoming that year, painting the rangeland with wildflowers and fresh green grass. The Triple R thrived under Xavier's management, and Lucy's role had expanded beyond cooking to helping Richard Reed organize the household accounts, a task for which her Philadelphia education had prepared her well. The first few weeks after she'd removed the sack had been difficult, as expected. Townsfolk stared, children asked loud questions, and some people crossed the street to avoid her. But Xavier had remained steadfast at her side, his quiet dignity and obvious affection for her silencing the worst of the gossips. Over time, as inevitably happens in small communities, Lucy's scarred face became simply another familiar sight in Redemption Creek. Her cooking skills earned her respect, and her gentle manner won her friends among the more open-hearted residents. On a perfect May morning, with the scent of lilacs drifting through the open windows of the Triple R Ranch house, Lucy stood in the parlor wearing a simple cream-colored dress. Wildflowers adorned her hair, arranged to complement rather than hide the scarred side of her face. Xavier waited for her by the fireplace, his eyes filled with such love that Lucy's lingering insecurities melted away like spring snow. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, smiling at the small gathering of ranch hands, townspeople, and the beaming Richard Reed. "We are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." As Lucy and Xavier exchanged their vows, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment, from a frightened woman hiding behind burlap to a bride standing proudly before her community, face uncovered, heart open. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier cupped her face in his hands, scarred side and all, and kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. "Mrs. Reed," he whispered against her lips, "my beautiful, courageous wife." Lucy smiled up at him, no longer counting the cost of such expressions. "Mr. Reed," she replied, "the man who saw me when I couldn't even see myself." Together they turned to face their guests, ready to begin their life together under the vast Wyoming sky where a woman once hidden in shame had found, in a cowboy's steadfast heart, the courage to show her true face to the world.